All right, so I'd like to welcome some new faces here. And first of all, Angela Chittick, and she is the clerk out in Selwyn. So welcome, Angela. Then we have Alec Denias, and I think he's going to be leading us through this. And of course, Eric Thornley. And also we have Mary Coolis, who is a counselor from Selwyn, joining us. I think everyone else. So welcome all the new faces, and I will turn it over. And I think, Alec, you're going to start off here with us.
Well, thank you very much for having us here.
You'll see the green on, and then you're live. Again, a little hard. There you go.
All right. Well, thank you very much for having us here. The purpose of our getting here together is to really try to promote a better understanding and awareness of accessibility and what it means to us. And we're going to do this through some in-person, I guess, testimonials or stories. So I'm going to tell a little story, and Eric is going to tell a story as well. And then Angela will wrap it all up and talk about the work of the Joint Accessibility Advisory Committee and how we promote and try to encourage accessibility within the county. So you folks are a very important part of that, of course, as the policymakers. So to start off, start with the presentation. So imagine, and it's somewhere. There we go. Okay, so imagine the journey of life as being on a boat. You're just bobbing along on the ocean, going where the wind and the current takes us. Once in a while, we hit a rough patch of water that tosses us around and throws us off track. But soon things return to normal and we continue on our unremarkable journey. So we should be on another slide there. Okay, so the next slide. Okay, there's a rough patch of water. Now imagine the perfect storm hits and your boat swamped and sinks, and you find yourself in the icy cold waters of the ocean. And this is what it feels like when a traumatic injury like paraplegia occurs. Until the age of 29, my boat bobbed along quite nicely. I grew up on a farm with 6 siblings, went to university, graduated with a degree in forestry, got a job with the Ministry of Natural Resources, and I was married 2 years later. I love my job as a forester in the Tweed district. I got to spend a lot of time outside in the bush, a place where I've always felt at home. And I also love to play sports. I played soccer, hockey, baseball, and earned a brown belt in karate. In November of 1979, I decided to take up the sport of bow hunting. And on my second time out, my perfect storm hit. I was climbing into the tree stand when the branch under my foot broke and I fell. And even though I was only 7 feet up, I landed on my head and shoulders and suffered a compression fracture of the spine. It was in the emergency department lying face down on a stretcher when I found out how serious my injuries were. And even, I remember how ironic it was that I was lying face down on the stretcher, and the only thing I could see was the doctor's legs and feet when he was telling me that I was no longer going to be able to walk ever. Over the next few weeks while I was lying in the hospital bed, I had lots of time to ponder my new reality. I was 29 years old, just starting a career in forestry, newly married, ready to start a family, and active in all kinds of sports. And now I could no longer walk. Yes, my boat had sunk, and I was in a hostile ocean. After several weeks on the ward where my physical injuries were dealt with, I was moved to the rehab department in Kingston General Hospital. There I was one of 8 persons with a spinal cord injury. Over the course of 4 months in rehab, I observed firsthand how people faced with incredible adversity and a challenge reacted to their perfect storm. Let's go back to that ocean and that sunken boat. And there's an old saying about adversity that you either sink or swim. What I saw in that rehab unit in Kingston were 3 basic reactions to adversity that I will describe as sink, float, or swim. So sometimes the icy cold water, in this case, the full realization of what paraplegia incurs, is so overwhelming that one just gives up. This is what happened to Marty, who was a young man who suffered a broken neck in a football game. Marty was young and athletic, and he defined his worth through his wholeness. Without functioning legs, he no longer saw himself as a whole person, and he became deeply depressed. He hated being seen in a wheelchair, and so he stayed in his bed most of the time. A year later, Marty was admitted to the chronic care unit, and he was never to leave the hospital. In adversity, we must be prepared to accept our new reality and to reinvent ourselves in line with that reality in order to avoid sinking into despair. The second reaction I saw was what I call floating. It's like holding on to a piece of wood, waiting to be rescued. Wayne could have been described as a floater. Wayne was a mountain climbing when he fell and broke his neck. He saw himself as a victim of circumstance, of bad luck. He felt he was owed something for having suffered through such a tragic circumstance. Wayne chose to float, waiting for others to rescue him. And as a result, he grew increasingly dependent on others for everything. I remember him calling out to the nurse at all hours of the night for the least little things. He eventually went home, but he was always angry and bitter and demanded that others wait on him. And it was too much for his wife and his children to handle. And within 2 years, they left. Wayne dealt with his storm by getting bitter instead of getting better. And the third option is to swim. I remember on the second day that I was in the hospital, my sister and her husband came up to visit me. And I remember her clearly saying, "What have you got yourself into this time?" For some reason, what she said really stuck with me. And I realized, yes, I got myself into this situation, and it really was up to me to find a way to get out of it. So even though life looked a lot different now than what I had envisioned, my goals, which were to work at a job that I loved, to start a family, to be involved in sports, to be involved in the community, and to be healthy, those goals were still the same. They didn't change with my injury. So I made a conscious choice to see the road ahead as full of possibilities rather than limitation. And I love the saying that it's only after we have lost everything that anything is possible. So on the journey through life as a person with disability, I have some observations and lessons that I would like to share with you. So that first lesson, of course, is to swim. And what I mean by this is to accept responsibility for your life. Know that it is you who will get you where you want to go, no one else. We don't know why bad things happen to us, but we always have a choice of how we react to those things and how we live our lives. Set your goals in pencil because life has a way of changing. You never know when the detour will lead to your destiny. The second lesson is to refuse to be limited by the expectations of others. You don't know what I can do. I returned to work 4 months after my fall, but I was told by my boss that I couldn't return to my old job as a forester. You can't walk in the bush, he said. So instead, they had lined up an office job for me. But I saw the situation in a different light, not as a problem, but as a challenge. I needed to find a way to travel through the bush so I could do my job. Not I can't, but how can I? I was able to keep my old job, but now I didn't walk through the bush. I drove an old train vehicle. Every one of us has the experience of someone telling us, "You're too small, you're too old, you're too whatever," or "That's just not possible." Don't limit your potential by succumbing to the expectations others have of you. Put aside all the reasons it won't work and find the one reason that it will work. And my third lesson is to step out of your comfort zone. I clearly remember the day I was released from rehab and sent home. It was a day of unbelievable mental contrasts. On one hand, I was happy to be well and able to get back to living a normal life. On the other hand, there was fear, uncertainty, and a looming sense of foreboding. I was leaving the safety and comfort of the hospital, I was a person with a disability stepping into a world designed for the able-bodied. It took tremendous courage to step through those doors. I worked through that challenge by cultivating a sense of progress, setting daily goals for myself, and accomplishing little things. Challenges are what make life interesting, and overcoming them is what makes life meaningful. Strange as it may seem, cutting firewood and Nordic skiing are a passion of mine. Being able to do both again after having thought them to be impossible after my injury is a great boost to my self-confidence and self-esteem, and it motivates me to do things even better in life, greater. So my fourth lesson is from Gandhi, and it's live the change you want to see. I'm a strong supporter of the Paralympic movement and believe these games have gone a long way towards challenging the perceptions of persons with disability. I've been a participant in the games 5 times myself as an archer. And during those years of competing, I've met some incredibly inspiring people. Take Vivian Foray, for example. At the Vancouver Games, Vivian skied her way to 5 medals. With only 4% vision, Vivian makes her way down the alpine slalom slope at speeds of up to 110 kilometers per hour, guided from behind, receiving instructions via radio. This, to my way of thinking, is not a person with disability, but a person with an amazing ability. And that's what the Paralympic movement is about. It's changing our focus, seeing and appreciating the ability, not the disability. Kids often come up to me and say that it must be awful to be in a wheelchair, but it isn't. A wheelchair just takes the place of my legs. I want to change that attitude and perception that people have and show that persons with disability can and do live normal lives. In the 35 plus years, well, I guess that's a little bit outdated now, 40 some plus years, but I've been a person with disability. I've seen huge changes in removing barriers in the physical environment. Curb cuts, ramps, automatic doors, audible traffic signals, to name a few. Yet there's still a long way to go. I see the greatest challenge to accessibility now to be attitudinal barriers. The notion that persons with disability are dependent on others, they are in poor health, they make inferior employees, and generally they are not capable. For example, a study conducted by DuPont, 80% of the respondents agreed with the statement that a person with a disability is less likely to be hired for a job even though they are equally qualified. And I think that's perhaps the reason why 50% of Canadians with a disability looking for work are unemployed. Attitudinal barriers, for example, at one time I was standing in line sitting in line at the bank to cash a check. And as I placed my check on the counter, the cashier looked behind me to the person standing behind me and said, would he like this deposit in his savings or checking account? So the perception was that I was there with a support person, right? And the person behind me was my support person. So she assumed that the person behind me was my caregiver. So recently, a sports club received a grant for the installation of an elevator. And the proposal was to make the lounge area accessible, but not the playing area, because it was thought that there were insufficient persons with disability that would ever play that sport. But this is so wrong. Do you see why? Because it denies the person with disability equal opportunity to play. And that's what I say, quite often removing physical barriers is only a way to make inclusion, right? So the big thing about accessibility, it should be inclusive. You have to, if I can't get into a building and be included in what's going on, then that's the big issue, is inclusiveness, as well as accessibility. So the fifth lesson is to focus on our abilities and strengths and not to dwell on our inabilities and weaknesses. When faced with a physical disability, it's crucial to focus on the parts of the body that still work. And Stephen Hawkins is an amazing example of living this rule. In life, we are not all created equal. We all have our talents, some realized and others waiting to be discovered. Get comfortable with yourself, flaws and alls. Charles Darwin said, it was not the strongest or even the most intelligent that survived, but those that are most able to adapt to change. Think about that. All of us have an amazing ability to adapt, but how often do we fear and resist change and thus fail to adapt? Yeah. Adapting is a critical part of living successfully. Remember how Marty was not able to adapt to his new reality? My belief and attitude is that I can do just about anything I could before my accident. I just need to find a different way of doing it. My sixth lesson is that no one climbs a mountain alone. Recently, I saw a documentary about a man in a wheelchair who climbed a mountain in Africa, Mount Kilimanjaro. Through incredible perseverance and grueling work, he made it to within a few hundred meters of the summit, but found he couldn't go any farther. He was totally depressed, having come so far only to fail. And it was then that the guide said to him, "No one climbs a mountain alone." And they carried him to the summit. We should be at the next slide there. There we go. So this lesson is about putting aside your ego and learning to ask for and accept help from others. After my accident, I went into a state of absolute and total dependence on others in every aspect of my life. And every day I struggled and fought to be a little less dependent on others. I remember great milestones like being able to turn myself in bed, transferring into a wheelchair, driving a car, moving independently, washing, etc. The things we all take for granted. It's not easy for anyone to admit they need help. But I learned that asking for help does not make me less strong or capable. Be strong enough to stand alone, smart enough to know when you need help, and brave enough to ask for it. I've learned over the years that when those in a position to help others do so, we all benefit from the balance that's created. And the seventh lesson is to be happy, to have patience, and to use humor. Being happy doesn't mean that everything is perfect in life. It means that one has chosen to look beyond the imperfections in life. Patience certainly has been my best friend in coping with the frustrations of living in a world designed for the able-bodied. I've become very proficient with using a wheelchair, and I've come to realize that it's not so much my physical condition that's disabling, but instead it's the physical environment surrounding me that disables me. Like not being able to get into a building because of no stairs, and there's no ramp, or because of stairs and no ramp. And finally, the eighth lesson is that the meaning of life is simply to give life meaning. An accessible and inclusive community are the means that enable me to give meaning to my life, to be independent, to make social connections, to have courage to take risks, and to accept challenges, and to roll through new doors. Thank you. Now, from a different perspective, Eric is going to talk about living life as a person with a visual impairment.
So, can you lead me to? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're right.
That's right here. You don't have to talk right into the mic, okay?
See,
Yeah, I think you're okay.
I'm here,
Right
right here,
there.
right here. Okay. You can hear me? Excellent.
Yes.
So the bad news is that I am blind due to a disease called retinitis pigmentosa, which is a hereditary degenerative disease. And I was not until I was in my early 20s that I was declared legally blind. And since then, it's been a steady decline to today, where I have very little usable vision. The good news is that blindness is not a death sentence. As a blind person, I have lived a very full, very happy life that has included gainful employment, meaningful gainful employment. I am married to a very beautiful wife. I've been able to raise a couple of children. I have enjoyed paddling and sailing, canoes, kayaks, and sailboats, often by myself. I have enjoyed making music with my friends in a few different bands. I have enjoyed watching movies and TV shows, and I've enjoyed reading books. I've pretty much lived a typical life, except it isn't really typical, because in order to do all of that, I've had to depend on the accessibility of technology and the accessibility of places and my own ability to adapt and overcome. And very much I've had to depend on the acceptance and the assistance of sighted people in my life. The progress of accessibility globally, especially in the last 20 years, I would say, has just been phenomenal. I think it's probably a blinding flash of the obvious to say that there has never been a better time in history to be blind than today. There are so many opportunities that have opened up because of the accessibility that is on offer. At the same time, though, there's still barriers, and we still have a ways to go. There's a mathematical axiom that I think if you were to ask a number of blind people, they'd probably all agree that whenever a blind person has to do something, it takes twice the effort to achieve half the results. And that's not a complaint. That's just a realization that we live in a world whose systems were designed by and for sighted people, and we have to adapt to that reality. In terms of how I accomplish some of the things I've accomplished, I use on a computer or a cell phone or a tablet, I use what's called a screen reader, which is a piece of software that identifies and describes what is on a screen or a web page or a document, including any objects that are on that screen, so that they can be read and then also can be manipulated by a blind person. And that, of course, has helped me to get employment, as well as to enjoy using a device at home. But not all web pages are accessible to a screen reader. Not all documents are created to be used with a screen reader, and so there's still some work to be done. There's a difference also between accessible and usable, and I have an example of that quite recently in the Selwyn monthly newsletter, which was fully accessible to me. My screen reader had no problems reading every single word in the newsletter. The problem was that my screen reader had to read every single word in the newsletter from top to bottom in order for me to get the information out of it that I was looking for. I had no way to navigate to the sections that I wanted to read. So there was a suggestion made that if we could what's called tag or identify the headings in the newsletter to the screen reader, and also to describe the images using what's called the alt text or alt description tag, that would make it much more usable for a blind person. So that was done, and now I can enjoy the newsletter as much as anyone else and skip past the stuff that doesn't really interest me by using heading navigation. So, took a little bit, very little effort really to make something go from accessible to usable. In the area of entertainment, I use, there's a service available called audio description, or sometimes described video services. And that allows me to watch a movie or a TV show, and when there's no dialogue, then there was an attempt made to describe the what's on the screen, the scene or the action or the characters, what clothes they're wearing, color of their hair is, you know, any significant objects that are in the scene. And it allows a blind person to mentally visualize what is happening on the screen and to enjoy a TV show or movie as much as any sighted person. And that has been wonderful. And, you know, even 10, 15 years ago, the amount of content that was available with description, I could have probably watched in about a week of steady watching. Today, if I were to start, it would take me the rest of my life just to get through the content that's available now. And of course, they're continuing to add to it, which is wonderful. But you know, not every movie is being described, and of course, there's a whole back catalog of content that needs to be described. And hopefully, someone's working on that, maybe with AI or something. I don't know, but the advent of audiobooks, which I don't know if people know, that was originally something that was created for blind people that has made its way into the mainstream use. But that allows me to read, in a sense, books. When they're not available as audio format, I can read them by using a text-to-speech engine and read ebooks, like from Kindle. And if I'm really desperate and I want to read a book and it's only available as a paperback or on paper, I can take the time to scan it with OCR and read it, again, using a text-to-speech engine. Not my favorite thing to do. It's kind of clunky, but you know, if it has to be done, it can be done. I like to visit, you know, restaurants and pubs, especially pubs. But you know, I hardly ever, you know, drink and drive. And for most of the restaurants and pubs have got their menus online on the internet. Wow, that time really. So I am able to know what I'm going to order before I get there. I also sail using a GPS, which gets me to and from where I need to go, but doesn't offer any collision avoidance, which could be a problem. I guess since we're up kind of strapped for time, I'll conclude with sort of this thought that, you know, we've come a long way, but we still have a long way to go. And you know, accessibility has really opened up an entire world for blind and other disabled people, and it requires, you know, the support of everyone to really make it work for us. Yeah, thank you.
If I could just thank both Alex and Eric, we're not winding up yet, but just to thank you for your testimonials. They're inspiring and positive, and I think each in our own lives can learn some lessons as well. And as you say, we've certainly made progress, but there's a lot more to come. And I do also want to recognize Carolyn Amiot for being on our committee as well. And I'll ask you at the end, maybe Carolyn, to say a few words, because I know you've gained a lot of insight, and this has been a committee that you have certainly been a positive and brought things back to the council for us. So I'll turn it back to Angela, but thank you both. It's inspiring to have you here today.
All right, and we're